Hello, folks. Welcome to everyone who's here. It's really good to have you. Thanks for your time this afternoon. I'm really excited to jump in with some of the speakers that we have today to give you a quick background on Nurture, but really the topic of conversation here is all around formative assessment and feedback. And we've got an amazing group of speakers to learn from here today. So without further ado, I will pop on ahead and learn a bit more. One thing just from the outset, this will be recorded for anyone who isn't able to join. So if there's any issues, then just so you're aware that there will be a recording. And also the chat is open right throughout the whole session. We want to get those questions. We want to hear from what is pressing for you on your end as you watch this. So please do jump in with any questions as you see fit. Okay, so our topic is formative assessment with technology in action. So we're really going to get some hands-on experience and discussions going today. So that's what we're going to put the focus on. And just a heads up for who we have speaking with us. So as outlined at the start, we've got Mark Anderson, and we also have Michael Chiles. So I'm really excited to talk to both guys here today. Myself, I'm Dave, the co-founder and CEO of Nurture. And with me I have my colleague, Dr. Stephen Comiskey. Stephen is our Director of Teaching and Learning. And we previously would have had time with universities and as himself before joining our team about a year ago. So what will we be talking about today? We're going to do a very quick intro to Nurture. I'll give you a background on who we are and what we do. Then we're going to have a chat with Mark, who's going to look at some of the kind of trends and what he's seeing when it comes to formative assessment and feedback within the industry. Next, we'll be asking Michael what the perspective he has as an educator within the school and the experience he has, not just as a teacher and a member of the leadership team, but also what he's done in terms of his knowledge and the books that he's written as well. So hugely wealth of experience for that. Next, Mark will actually go through his experience of using Nurture and actually give an outsider's perspective. And the last thing we might touch on before the Q&A is to hear a bit more from Michael on the craft of assessment principles. So something from his recent book. Okay, so to get a quick intro to Nurture and to take you through it, I'll go back to the very start. And when we began, there's 25 students to one teacher in the average classroom. That was the challenge we saw. And in 2017, we had another organization called Jump Brigade. And the idea was to support students from less fortunate backgrounds that didn't have the option of private tuition. And with that, that meant that we looked at supporting those students through an online intervention. To do that, we had to build a research framework, and we put together a platform for how best to do that. And this is built around one key finding, that students who receive individualized instruction perform better than 98% of traditionally taught students. So when it's that compelling how effective that one-to-one interaction can be, how do we make that possible in the classroom environment? And that's where Nurture was born out of, actually seeing that the work we'd done in reaching those hardest to reach students, this is now something that, in terms of a platform and the way the world has changed in the last 2 years in education, this is now something we can put in the hands of teachers globally. And that's where Nurture was started to really take off from. So to summarize that, we look at this as closing the feedback loop. That it's something that has been very important, but maybe it's always been harder to achieve with the workload required or the expertise required on the teacher's end. So how can we simplify closing that feedback loop, because we know how powerful that can be? An example of what we do to help this happen is each student submission, we ask them to tell us how confident they are in their answers. Confidence being a hugely important part of effective feedback. Similarly, when a student receives their feedback, they're able to then reflect on that feedback before unlocking their grades. So you'll start to see elements of how the research frameworks behind the scenes are embedded into that workflow for how our teachers and students interact using Nurture. To go back a bit, so I mentioned the research collaborations that we started with, and that the frameworks that have been built. So Dr. Stephen Comiskey was actually at Trinity College at the time and learned the Research, EdTech and Design Centre there. We also have a PhD ongoing through the School of Education in the University of Limerick. We are very closely aligned to Microsoft as an education specialist partner, and we actually also had a Google Classroom integration in our earlier days as well. So both of those are kind of our starting points, but Microsoft has been our focus in more recent times. And in recognition of that, so we were very proud to be shortlisted for the Global Silicon Valley Cup as one of the Elite 200. We work with a number of Microsoft Showcase schools and colleges across the UK and Ireland, and also Western Europe. And we're also shortlisted for the Best Formative Assessment Project in the e-assessment awards as well. So some really exciting things that we're really proud of within the organization. And how that kind of comes together, and how I like to describe it, is that we want to be able to empower that human connection between teachers and students by closing the feedback loop. that as a piece of technology has to be how does this facilitate what's happening in the classroom, not taking away from it. And that's a really important part for us. So we look at this as simplifying formative assessment and feedback for schools and colleges. How can we make their lives easier by embedding research frameworks, by simplifying processes through technology? And the last part, before I kind of jump on, will be to very quickly show nurture in action. And purposely, I'm going to keep this short and sweet in order to be able to pass on time to the guys for those who we're going to be learning from. But just to kind of give you a sense of the nurture way, kind of that some of the key points within this. I won't spend long, but just to highlight, so for example, the importance of collecting students' confidence with their submissions, guiding teachers in terms of a framework for looking at formative assessment when it comes to task level, process level, and where to next. Then you feed into in terms of closing that feedback loop with students unlocking their grades after reflecting on the feedback. And the last one, then how that feeds into deeper student insights. So where we now have an insight in terms of how our students are engaging, looking at their confidence increasing over time, as well as grades and an engagement score as well. So all of those things are really kind of unique to us, but something that we've been really excited to see the power of that as it works in the classroom. So very quickly, I'm going to share my screen so you can see the nurture in action. And the key thing I'm looking to get across here is just what I mentioned earlier, that idea that showing the research behind the scenes for teachers. And that's the really key part that I would look to get across from our perspective here. So first things first, if you are a Microsoft Teams user and school, very quickly you can get started with Nurture by simply clicking on the plus icon, adding the tab within your existing classroom. So the setup is very straightforward in terms of getting started up and running with Nurture. So literally within the space of 3 clicks, a teacher can have their classroom set up and their students will be able to access Nurture. So tapping into the single sign-on, tapping into the fact that you can now have the use of Nurture from within the existing environment they're used to, it makes it really easy for any teacher and educator to get started. So that's a starting point. And what I'm going to do here is just going to look at a sample assessment and in kind of true TV chef fashion, here's one I prepared earlier. But I'll very quickly show some of the key elements of what I want to get across before passing it off to the guys to learn a bit more. So let's take my history class as an example. We're going through an assessment here. I can include a description, links to other, whether it's OneNote, YouTube videos, a whole host of different types of attachments as well if I want to record a voice note, among other things. Again, putting the flexibility in the hands of a teacher. Setting out my due date, scheduling this to go out. Grading, even as an option, doesn't always have to be graded, but you can have marks, percentages, grade descriptors, or it can be non-graded whatsoever. But the learning outcomes is the first point where you start to see that framework come to life. So what we're doing here is we're having teachers set a clear purpose for the assessment. What is it that you want your students to achieve as part of this, and setting those clear goalposts for them to work towards. Now, these can be, depending on the depth that they want to go to, the different types of classes that a teacher may have, and even collaborating amongst other teachers within the school and that department to make this easier to bring standards up across the board. But then we'll look at feedback type. So what level of depth do you want to go to for your feedback? So is it a more shorter homework-based assessment, in which case the simple feedback might be the best option, where you still get the student confidence, you still get to have them reflect on the feedback, but you don't go to that same level of depth of feedback. Deep feedback is where you look at that, the view of the task level, the process level, the where to next, like the John Hattie kind of framework, putting that type of structure to the feedback is where we'd look to it there. And the final piece, probably the most important one in getting across that idea of closing the feedback loop, is the student reflection. That after a student receives their feedback, how do you know that not just they've seen it, but they're actually taking those learnings on board? So the more basic one, the emoji response for younger students or more basic tasks, is how do you feel about the feedback? Are you disappointed? Are you happy? Having to add a comment afterwards and only then unlocking their grade. So what this is having students do is they're reflecting on what the teacher's feedback has said, not on that ego response of how they did. And that's really important in terms of seeing the value they get from the feedback. So going one step further, and the bit that really excites us is the 3-2-1 response, where we can now ask students to tell us 3 things they've learned, 2 things they found interesting, and 1 question they're still left with. And what that does is it really have students build healthy habits around reflecting on feedback that isn't based solely on how they performed from a grade or mark perspective. So like I've been so lucky to sit in on some of our schools and seeing the feedback classes in action, and just hearing from the teachers talk about how students are getting really excited, and actually hearing from the students themselves talking about how they can now see not just the value they get in the feedback at the time, but they love when Miss tells them what they did well or how they can improve, but also that they're coming back to that feedback 3, 4, 5 weeks down the line. So those healthy habits of feedback are being built at the student's end as well. So that's kind of perspective from nurture and action. What I'm going to do now is hand over to our friend Mark and get his perspective. So Mark, if you're there to join me, I'm going to pull you in here. How are you, Mark?
Yeah, really well. Thank you very much, David. Lovely to sort of see you again, and great to see that little demonstration of nurture there as well. I'm such a fan, so thanks for asking me to come along and share today as well. Thank you.
Not at all. Glad to have you. So I suppose a good place to dive in, Mark, might be looking at the idea of seeing those trends in the shift towards more formative assessment in schools. So kind of leaving it open from yourself to start this off. What's the perspective, considering the number of schools, educators, those in EdTech that you interact with?
Well, it's really lovely, actually. You know, efficacy in everything to do with teaching and learning in schools has come on so much since I graduated all those many years ago, as the grey hairs will sort of testify. Chats around formative assessments and cognitive science approaches to teaching and learning just weren't part of the conversation back then. And so over the past sort of nearly 30 years that I've been working in education, it's just been great to see so many more conversations around what is effective, what is going to have an impact. There are so many tools out there. EdTech is one of the biggest sort of growth industries in the world. Massive investments being made into it, but there are few and far between that take the same sort of level as you guys have been around the thinking behind what it is that you do when it comes to using that technology for teaching and learning in the classroom. So, yeah, what I've been seeing, the trends are really more and more conversation, thinking about not just things around formative assessment, but retrieval practice, spaced practice, dual coding, cognitive load, and so forth, but so forth and so on. And so that's and efficacy around EdTech and the thinking behind how a tool will work. Groups like the EdTech Evidence Group, for example, coming together to try and have those conversations about applicable EdTech. The likes of Professor Rose Luckin sharing about what a good one looks like when it comes to using technology, particularly with AI in her instance. That's the real shift I've been seeing over the years, and long may it continue, because with so much needing to be taught on the curriculum, you haven't got time to be wasting. And so yeah, it's really important, I think, to make sure that we do right by the children, obviously, and right by ourselves as educators. And the best way to do that is to work in the most efficient ways possible. So yeah, many great movements forwards over the years that I've seen, Dave.
Brilliant, Mark, and good friend and colleague of yours as well, kind of as he spoke about Al Cadensley, the way he talks about it can't just be technology for technology's sake. So that there's a lot of people, as you said, who've been advocating for more of the efficacy of what we're putting into practice when it comes to EdTech. So I mean, Al being one strong advocate like yourself, but yeah, it's good to see that conversation is happening more commonly now.
No, absolutely. And what's lovely to see as well, Dave, is more and more being shared, more research being undertaken about what's effective. So I mentioned Rose Luckin before. Her work with Educate Ventures and UCL, University College London, is fantastic to see. It's been really great to see the likes of Kat Scutt at the Chartered College of Teaching as well, bringing together lots of great research about what is effective use of technology for teaching and learning as well. And speaking of them, like of Professor Cathy Lewin from Manchester Met University, she's been sharing an awful lot. She was one of the co-authors of the Education Endowment Foundation's guide to using technology in the classroom. There's a great section in there actually on formative assessment and the ways in which it can be used, and what I love about the fact that the research is happening, it takes away the chances that you can have with technology. Yeah, so rather than leaving your success to chance, you're going on a best bets approach. So what is the best bet? What is going to help me the most when it comes to using it? And so guys like that one from the Education Endowment Foundation have been really pivotal to my thinking and sharing, because it really gives you the right direction to be exploring if you're looking to develop your use of technology in the classroom.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I'll let you take it over from here, Mark, just in terms of as we move on. I know that there's a couple of pieces you want to bring in on the back of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, thinking about what works, a really pivotal book for me, as it's been around for quite some time now, but this, the book Visible Learning for Teachers, you mentioned Hattie's framework earlier, and which underpins some of the things that run within Side Nurture. This is really important, I think, and we've all had that experience as children in the classroom. There are teachers who, when you submit work, as a child, you spend time on it, you're invested in it. And it was great having conversations with you guys back a few weeks ago as well about people who've been influential in your thinking. And I'm normally terrible with quotes unless they're in front of me, but Dylan Willem shares about how learners don't engage with their learning and their progress once they've got a grade, which is great about the sort of formative feedback you can get within Nurture. But we've all been children in class where the teacher's taken a week, 2, 3, 4 weeks sometimes to reply and respond to bits of work that you've done. And I get it, 20 years in the classroom, I know the pressures of workload, but as time progresses, so children lose interest in the thing they once tried really hard in, and that's damaging for relationships as well between teacher and student too. So this quote for me about the feedback loop from John Hattie really resonated with me when I first read it, and I remember the likes of David Didow sharing an awful lot about it as well at the time. And it's really important, I think, making sure that feedback is just in time, just for me, just for where I'm in my learning process, and just what I need to help move me forwards. And what's great to see with the Nurture tool is it does just that. It's super easy to use. It's quick. It's effective. It's personalised. It's just where they're in a learning process, and it's absolutely formative. Which means that children know what their next steps are, and it helps them progress and improve their work and their understanding as they move their way through. Something else I wanted to spend a few moments on as well, if you haven't been thinking about this, and we all should as professionals, but it is that feedback loop. And an old colleague of mine, Zoe Elder, who wrote the fantastic Full On Learning book, talked about this, and you see parts of this in Andy Tharby and Sean Allison's book about teaching and learning in the classroom, and it's that bit in here which says so that is so important. And so we know what the feedback loop is. Student does some work, they hand it to the teacher, and we hand it back, but we do that so that learning is informed, so that our teaching can be responsive to support those learners in the classroom. Just two sort of key things that really informed my thinking around teaching and learning with or without technology, because actually, sometimes, as the TPAT model shares with us, not using technology can sometimes be the best option. But when technology can afford us the opportunity to be more efficient and effective and reduce our workload, then you'd be foolish not to consider it as part of what you're trying to do with your children in your classroom, I think.
Excellent stuff. And Mark, will come back to you in a few moments as well. But what I'm going to do now is bring in Michael Chiles. Michael, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to add you in here. How are you today, Michael? Oh, you're just on mute there. Should be able to unmute yourself. But I'll introduce you just in terms of the question. So from your, you've a fascinating, unique perspective, Michael, from the perspective of obviously as a practitioner and educator within the school, but also you've extensive work done when it comes to writing your books around this whole area as well. So I'd love to get your perspective now in terms of what you're seeing, not just in your own school, but across the board, I guess, with continuous assessment and feedback becoming a really central part. It's always been important, but it's almost like it's ramped up another level.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking to you then. I was still on mute, wasn't I? So yeah,
you were. That's all good.
I think assessment is a fundamental part of everything that we do in the school on a daily, weekly basis, and I think that every lesson, any responsive teacher who is grappling with understanding what students know and what students don't know, and what students have actually understood, it requires some form of assessment. And some of the things that especially that I'm seeing in schools, and I've worked with a number of schools, is how schools actually get that right? What do they do to get that right? And it's bringing in those three strands of assessment: that assessment of, assessment for, and assessment as, and finding that right balance between that trio of assessment threads to actually get that rich understanding of your students that you're teaching, or more so the students that you're overseeing as whole cohorts or whole year groups. And I think that especially as Mark has already talked with the research and the cognitive science around the idea of retrieval practice and spacing practice, being able to interleave and being able to dual code, and all those strategies that we know work when used effectively in the classroom, all underpin assessment approaches. Now, I think one of the fundamental aspects, and something that schools need to find the right balance on, is how they use assessment to capture data. And I think, is that data being captured for the right reasons? And how is that data then being used?
Very interesting. And when it comes to, let's say, consider yourself within a school leadership role, and you're looking at the things that resonate most with a teaching staff as a whole, like when it comes to like really bringing home the importance of this, or how things can be improved. Are there any kind of things that you notice as a common theme that really strikes home when you're working with groups of teachers, large groups of teachers?
Yeah, I think most importantly, and Mark's alluded to it a little bit already, is workload. And I think assessment, you say the word assessment and to teachers, and automatically they think of workload. They think excessive amounts of marking, excessive amounts of feedback. And often when I talk to teachers about how they use assessment in schools, they often don't value the assessment approach and the feedback approach that actually is being used. It's more of a policy-driven tick box than an actual learning-driven approach. And I think that's one of the core elements. And I also think that actually there's complexity around getting assessment right, and that comes down to curriculum conversations that teachers and colleagues as subject groups have, in terms of what are you assessing, where are you assessing it, why are you assessing it, and how are you assessing it. And often there's that disjointed approach. There's not a common sort of like look at how to do that and get that right. And we know from all the research that actually, if we do assess students, we want to make sure that assessment that we put in place is right. It will give us the opportunity to yield the right information about our students, to then be able to give the right feedback. Because if we don't, then essentially we give an assessment and then we might not give the right feedback, because actually we don't get the right rich information that we wanted in the first place.
Yeah, it's a bugbear of mine, I guess, is trying to disassociate that link with, for example, marking being the thing that overwhelms teachers when the thought of assessment or feedback comes up, and just seeing that as one part of a much bigger picture. Yeah, like I can definitely resonate with that as well. Super, Michael, and we'll come back to a bit more in just a few moments. So what we might do now is pass it back to Mark, who's going to take us through elements of the what he's seen when he's been able to use Nurture. So Mark, I'll hand it back over to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I had the opportunity to have a good play around with Nurture, and you know, I first learned about Nurture just before Christmas, actually, and was just so excited about the potential and prospects with it. And I was badgering the team to please let me have a go, let me have a look around and see what's in there. And some absolutely fantastic features within there. I've mentioned it already, and Michael talked about it as well. The W word, workload. But what I loved in my trial of Nurture was and I've used Teams assignments, but I talk about nurture being a bit like Teams assignments on speed, really, because it is really quick and easy and effective when it comes to looking at the work the children have done or your students have done in the classroom. And so the process of working through checking the children's work is quick. There's easy access. Children can submit work however you want them to. You can view it quickly and easily and effectively. And the whole process of working through it is really good. And feedback, as we've all alluded to and shared so far, it is super important. And like Michael said, you start talking about marking. I worked in a school once. We had a thing called triple impact marking, and basically it was the children would do some work, they'd hand it in, we'd give them some formative feedback, they'd go away and improve it. We had dirt time, dedicated improvement reflection time. It come back to us, we'd mark it again, it'd go back to them, it'd improve it again. Oh my goodness. What I loved about nurture was when you go through, you highlight the you have like your success criteria for the work that you set inside nurture. And what you can do is you can target the students who need feedback, need to improve certain aspects of their work based upon those success criteria. And then once you've done that, it gives that targeted feedback to all of them in one go. So rather than having to type or handwrite on different bits of work, on all this sort of stuff, it just bring, and they all get that in one go. And I absolutely love that about it. Because children want that feedback, but why should you as a teacher have to write it 7 times when you're saying the same things? I'm sure all you teachers have written the same thing on similar documents, similar exercise books, so forth and so on over the years. Well, there's no need to do that when you're using nurture and checking and promoting and marking children's work. And as we all know from your learning scientists to everyone, it's just really, really lovely to have some software that is underpinned by the evidence of what works. We were booked in, me and the nurture team, to have a conversation. It was a half an hour. We talked for 90 minutes. It was just really lovely and refreshing to have that conversation with an EdTech company that is not about the EdTech. It's about how things work and the nuances of it and so forth and so on. So that's one thing. Another thing which really sings to me about the tool. And metacognition, as we know, is super important too. We need to activate our learners, and when they get that feedback that is just in time, just for them, just what helps move forward in their learning journey. All those things that we heard from John Hattie earlier on in the session. Engaging learners to be motivated to know what they need to do, how they need to do it, and the software is there to support you, enabling passing on that information that learners need to improve their work. Is just absolutely spot on for my money. And when you've got that student buy-in into their learning, and I'm sure the team can share about some of the case studies they've had. I was talking with one of the schools that use it, Charlotte Collegiate. I was talking with one of the school leaders at the school there. And I said, I absolutely love it. And the children love it too. And it improves conversations. They got some great case studies from there as well. Please do check those out. I'm sure Dave can share with you in a minute where you can find that stuff from the school. But it's so difficult to get children invested in their learning sometimes. But this is a great way to do it. And when it's done in a way which can help reduce the amount of workload you've got to do as well, then that's a big win for me. It's got loads of like little things in there as well, which make the job of leaving that feedback super easy as well. So, when you talk to your device to give that feedback, you can literally talk to the device. You don't have to spend loads of time typing. I mean, I share regularly about the power of dictation, but you don't even need to dictate. You can just record that feedback, which again makes it that much quicker and easier for you to do so with your learners. And so I sort of shared and if you're old enough to remember the adverts out of the 80s about that fence varnish, Ronseal. It does what it says on the tin, was the phrase from the TV advert. And I see nurture as being something that's very, very Ronseal, because it nurtures the learners. It gives them what they want. It gives them what they need when they need it to help them move them forward in that learning journey. And so, yeah, if you can't tell, I'm a bit of a fanboy when it comes to nurture, Dave. And closing that feedback loop, as you said, is so, so important. And so, again, great pleasure to be involved and engaged in this session, sharing about nurture today. Thank you.
Super stuff. Thank you, Mark. Lovely to hear words like that.
Very welcome.
Yeah, really nice to hear. Really nice to hear. So, yeah, just to keep the wheels in motion on the day that we have as well, for all those who are joining. And I know we have people across LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. So really great to see that the people are joining from multiple different places. What we might do now is just look at anyone who has questions. Please pop them in any comments wherever you are. We're collating them in the background here ourselves, so keep them coming if there is something that you'd like to ask any of us on our team here in Nurture, but of course Mark or Michael, who will be really the ones you want to be hearing from, I'm sure. So Michael, we might jump back to yourself, and I'll bring you back into the stream here, and I'll let you unmute yourself. But yeah, if you could just tell us a bit more, Michael, from this perspective of the craft principles, and obviously this is looking at assessment from an approach that you have within your book, but it'd be great because I'm sure there's aspects of this that are reiterated in some of the topics of conversation so far. So I'll let you kind of set the scene on that.
Yeah, so craft is an approach to how we can set up our assessments, and I think all in the whole discussion here is that actually what we do before we assess and what we do after is actually the important part. Getting the assessment right, yes, getting the structure right, and Nurture is a really great platform to allow or facilitate that to happen. But actually what we do beforehand and what we do after is probably more pinnacle once we've got those assessment structures right. And sort of C&R of craft is all about condense and reflection. It all builds in the retrieval and space practice model and elements of how we create lessons, how we deliver lessons as teachers to ensure that our students can actually condense knowledge into powerful notes. And I think something that I'm quite passionate about over the last couple of years is actually many schools do the standard of get to the end of the school year, academic year, and they'll have a big clear out, and the caretaker comes around with the big bins to get rid of the class books. But actually, how are we getting students to create powerful notes to enable them to then actually use them to demonstrate how they are being sort of like a powerful tool for learning. So that's really, really important in that aspect, is to, in the case of, well, what are they doing with those notes and how are those notes being used in a powerful way to then reflect? Because actually, when they use the Nurture platform, you want them to be in a position where they've spent time condensing, reflecting on knowledge, to then enable that almost that show off of what they know and what they can do to the teacher. And then it's all about that feed forward and target driven improvement. Now, I've worked with John Hattie quite a bit over the last couple of years, and Mark and yourself have mentioned John Hattie's pinnacle parts. And actually, one of the quotes that he wrote in my feedback book, The Feedback Pendulum, which sort of like followed on from craft for the F&T, he actually said, if we give feedback, when we give feedback in the classroom, does it actually make any sound? And that's a really powerful quote that was, and it really stuck with me, that idea of actually, is it making the sound that we want it to make? And if it's not, then we need to go back to what we've done in the CR and the A part of craft. And then that target-driven improvement, which is Mark's alluded to about Nurture and about the general like triple marking approach of the past, that actually that target-driven improvement needs to be granular. It needs to be really small chunks of what to do next. They need to see the light at the end of the tunnel, because ultimately, if they don't see that light at the end of the tunnel, then they won't make those improvements. And actually, it's harsh reality to say, but doing that assessment was almost pointless, because if they don't do anything with the feedback, then actually it's not it's not helping them to feed forward into whatever you want them to do next.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's something when we first start working with the schools, usually a smaller group of teachers who start with us, but it's that realization at the start for, especially like any teacher who's passionate about what they do, that sinking feeling of putting work really hard and effort into creating good feedback, and then not knowing if the students have even seen it or taken it on board or making the same mistakes again. It's so disheartening, because then that means that something was missing whereby they didn't take that feedback on board, and they're now making those same mistakes again. So that's, again, something we look at really closely of how to ensure that doesn't happen, so that the effort of teachers is really landing on the students' end as well. Just on that as well then, Michael, let's just, before we kind of open it up for, because we've got questions that have come in from a number of different places, but just maybe looking at if you were to advise a teacher, advise let's say someone who's passionate about this, and they're looking for a starting point in terms of improving their own feedback, but bringing others with them. What are the types of things that you'd say, okay, here's something you could look into, here's someone you could talk to? What are the types of things that you say, if you want to get people to buy into this movement, here's what the types of stuff that could help?
I think the research is quite clear that written feedback doesn't really have any impact unless students are doing something with it, and often there is the belief that the more you write in a book, the more you scribble on a student's book, the more benefit it has, but actually it doesn't. So if I was to say, like, in terms of how do people get colleagues to, if you like, buy into it, it's showing them actually, and I think probably, having spoken to a lot of teachers up and down the country over the last couple of years, many teachers wanted to change their approach to feedback. Many teachers want to change their approach to how they assess, but often it needs to come from leaders. And if I'm honest, it needs to come from the perspective of leaders having the belief that they can empower colleagues to assess and give feedback in the most appropriate way, without that constant requirement to meet a specific policy of, we need to do this at a certain amount of time, or we need to mark with a certain amount of depth, or we need to give this certain amount of targets. It's about empowering colleagues to be able to use and essentially what the EEF talk about as well, when you give feedback, it's about principles, not a step-by-step process, and actually adopting principles to giving feedback, and looking at the different principles, the strategies, and adopting it to your individual subject needs is probably the most powerful thing. And I think if anyone's looking to bring about change with assessment and feedback, speak to the students, because often that's missed out as well. How often do we speak to the students and say, well, what was you doing there? Why was you doing that? What did you understand by it? When your teacher wrote that, what did it mean to you? What did you do after that? And actually that can be really powerful as a first step to making some shift towards a more effective approach to assessment and feedback.
Love it. Really, really powerful. Even I think that resonates big time in terms of that senior leadership being able to empower staff, rather than kind of saying this is a requirement and going back on policy. Really like that, Michael. So that's a great finish. What we're going to do now, folks, as we approach the final 5 minutes or so, is open it up to questions, which I know, as I look on my other screen here, of other questions that have been coming in. So I'm going to bring Mark and also my colleague Stephen into the stream here as well. And what I'll do is, folks, I'll throw out the question and maybe direct it in a certain direction as I see fit. But a couple of the ones that have come in so far, so some have been on the earlier stage of the chat that's happened earlier, but one that came into us was what's the process for starting to use Nurture in my school? So I can give a quick example of that, and maybe Stephen, you could spend a minute or so just talking about how we run training and conduct kind of getting started within the school. So at starting point, first of all, will be to get in touch with us. We'd look to set up a demonstration for senior leadership and like make sure this is aligned towards plans within the school. It's really important, just as Michael said, that this aligns towards the longer term vision and what the school wants to do rather than individuals, because that's not going to lead to wider improvement. From there, then we'd look to get you started with a smaller group. We'd look to have about 20 teachers in that initial group, where we try to encourage that collaboration as well. So heads of department, where they start and they can bring others with them as a follow-on, and that initial group then start to work together and form a bit of a group themselves and start to the collaboration in terms of cross subjects, but also then departmentally as well. From there, then, and looking at previous successes we've had, that's where the rollout goes beyond that, where another tranche of teachers come on board. You now start to see full departments who are applying it across different school years, and the momentum builds. What I'd always say was that the momentum builds when teachers start to see the value with the students on the students' end. When it starts coming back to them of students saying, can we do the assessment and nurture, that they want to get that feedback, that's the moment where it's become clear to the teacher, okay, this is really landing with them. So we want to get to that point first with a smaller group before we say, let's get that entire school on board, because it's really important we get to that point with schools. So Stephen, maybe you want to give a very quick outline of the training and some of the things that you cover as part of getting schools started as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Dave. And just to quickly give you an overview of the training that we do. So we would host a 90-minute session with the group of teachers using Nurture. We would spend a good bit of time talking about the why of Nurture. So it's really important to understand the research behind it, because as we've heard from teachers, it's building up that trust, that knowing that actually, you know, when it's Friday, 6 o'clock in the evening and you're going through a lot of the corrections, that you can trust that Nurture is guiding you through an effective and research-led approach to giving feedback. You don't need to be cognizant of it. So we go through the why of Nurture, and then we do a product demo as well, and we set up a test classroom where we can experience what Nurture is like as both the teacher and the student. We also have a lot of support materials now. So we're now in the Microsoft Learn Center, which is going live in the next month or so. So if you want to start your MIE journey with us, you can reach out and let us know. Once that's live, we can send you the link. And we also have onboarding material as well, that maybe for when you're coming up to the end of an academic break, the midterm, the half term, the Christmas break, you want to just learn how to reuse it again, that brief part. We've got that as well. And we also have training articles as well online. So plenty of support and material, but your point of contact would be a 90-minute session with me.
Excellent stuff. I have an interesting one here, Michael, for yourself, Michael, as we get towards the end, because we'll probably look to wrap it up in the next few minutes. And this one asks about, I believe it comes from a teacher, but it could be from a member of the leadership team, but they say, our challenge is getting more teachers on board with the formative assessment style of feedback. How do we go from the minority to majority? So a bit like what you touched on earlier, but probably looking at it through the lens of, there's been some progress, but now where does that wider buy-in come from?
Yeah, I think that sharing the vision and sharing, that's always key when you're introducing anything new into a school. You share the vision, you explain the why behind it. And sometimes it's helpful actually to get a particular enthusiastic teacher or an enthusiastic department who want to trial something new that you want to introduce, and then get them to present it afterwards to the wider body and staff, and actually say, right, here were some of the sticking points, here the things that we struggled with. But I think the crucial reason why schools struggle is because they want to apply a whole blanket approach to every single subject when it comes to assessment and feedback. Now, actually, you have the same ingredients, but you apply it in a slightly different way. And that comes back to that idea that it's a principles-based approach to assessment and feedback, not a tick box exercise of X subject needs to do X and X subject needs to do this every single 2 weeks or every week, whatever it might be. And I think that's really important. So I'd say always share the vision, share the why, get people on board, get people to always do a bit of a SWOT analysis, the classic of how will this work for us and what might be the issues for us, get that out straight away, get an enthusiastic group of practitioners who are willing to give it a trial for a couple of weeks or however long it might be again, and get them to present it back to the staff. Because actually, often it's not that staff don't want to change or want to look at different ways of approaching these two core pedagogies in our classrooms. Actually, they don't know exactly what it looks like, because often when people present something new, you're presenting a criteria or set of principles that actually they need to see it in action. And I think that's probably the most important part to getting people to buy into it.
Yeah, I love it. And it makes me, maybe there's another future book in that, but the principles of assessment for principals sounds like one that you could use in future, Michael. We'll work out financials another time, don't worry. But Mark, actually feel free to follow in the back of that, but there's a kind of another question that is a bit similar, is around kind of starting out that journey and kind of the best starting point. So it kind of echoes what Michael was saying there in terms of starting with the vision, but even go back to the level of an educator and kind of their starting point. What's it like in terms of a learning curve? And we've covered an awful lot today. That might be a bit overwhelming. So kind of pairing it back to the starting point that is manageable. Everyone's at a different point. So what advice would you give there?
Well, like in most things, it's a change management thing, really. But Michael's given some great advice there around sharing from a leadership point about sharing the vision and the why and those sort of things. But there are loads of ways in which you can support teachers. But the thing is, I think about Amanda Natchan Klein's model, which talks about teacher confidence and competence in using technology. People would be somewhere along that bell curve when it comes to that confidence and competence, from survival right through to mastery, impact, and innovation. And so it depends on where you feel like you are on that journey. I would say if you're someone who feels like you're afraid of technology and it never works for me and it only ever works for the technicians or for you, Mark, and that sort of thing, then Michael's suggestion of working with departments who are keen and sort of trailblazers for these sort of things, having a buddy program whereby you can connect with and share with colleagues on these sort of things is super helpful. Flipping it back, there's something else that Michael said earlier about involving students in the conversation. Student digital leaders are super helpful, and actually in some of the schools where I see technology being used the best, students are part of that journey as well. And that again just promotes students massively in their journey of understanding how they learn and working alongside their teachers, and it also improves relationships between teachers and students as well. So I'd say don't be afraid to say I don't know, and if you're a school that has got student digital leaders, train those students in how to use Nurture as a teacher, so that they can ask in the moment. It's far easier to ask a student in your class often for teachers who are anxious about using technology. Much easier to ask a student in the class than risk knocking on the technician's door or doing a call out to get them to come to your classroom. I'm stuck again, and those sort of things. You want to make it as low threat as possible. But again, having had the chance to use Nurture myself, I wasn't having to get in touch, and I did that thing, where I didn't RTM. I just went in, jumped straight in, and started using it. So I would say it's still a relatively easy product to use as guide points as you work your way through, to support you with your learning as you're using it. But yeah, just have a go and buddy up, speak to those already using it, and if in doubt, ask a kid in your class. Even if they don't know how to use it, I suspect they probably would have a good crack at knowing where to go as well.
Agreed. Yeah, we'd be surprised what our students are capable of when we let them at it. Gents, I think we're going to wrap it up with that. Unless there are any other last few comments or questions that have come in, as far as I can see, I think we've covered quite a bulk of those. Any ones that we didn't get to answer, apologies, but we'll certainly look to follow up with you. Feel free to reach out to us as well. I'm just going to pop a little comment into the box there, just for those who want to find out more information. You can visit the website. You can have a look at, there's past webinars. There's more information in terms of being able to join a demo or book a demo with us as well. So plenty there. We'd be happy to learn more about what you're facing within your school and see how we can help. In the meantime, thank you, folks. Appreciate you joining, and have a lovely rest of your day.